Welcome to the fourth edition of the Sephardi Modernity Seminar Series. We are beyond grateful to continue counting on your participation and support for a fourth year in a row. Our seminar is co-sponsored by the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University and the Calgary Institute for the Humanities at University of Calgary, with the support of the Belzberg Program for Israel Studies. The title of this year's series is Carving Out Lights, Sephardi Mizrahi Women's Paradigm Change, and is organized by Yuval Ivri and myself, Angie Cohen. We chose this theme because we are indeed in dire need of light through these dark times that we are going through in the Israel and Palestine region. For 4 years, we have devoted our series to interrogating the processes by which Sephardi Jews crafted different versions of what it means to be modern. That is, what it means to live in the tension between the old and the new, the familiar and the unknown, to preserve our connection with the past while striving to respond to the present's challenges and paving a way to the future. As we always say, we see this seminar as a workshop where participants test ideas, share them, and come into a collaborative framework that we are knitting together in order to create a multifaceted approach to Jewish culture and history. This year's seminar, in many senses, responds to some of the questions we raised last year. Questions about memory, heritage, uses of the past, and the connection between our scholarly frameworks and ideas, ideologies, and future horizons they enable. That is where we left things last year, and that is our starting point today. In the midst of war, loss, and uncertainty, we turn to the work of Sephardi and Mizrahi women in search of ethical and political paradigms that may illuminate different experiences and standpoints that may take us towards a better future. A theme that will be recurrent this year is the place of the personal in the work of researchers and activists, or to put it more clearly, how feminist work necessarily acknowledges the specific, concrete person's experiences and their input into her work. It is a common theme in feminist literature, the rebellion against abstraction and all-encompassing theoretical paradigms that seem to be detached from the life and experiences they come from. The feminist standpoint, first and foremost, comes down to the concrete women who do the work. It is from these concrete experiences that our participants will build their work, their theoretical approaches, and their creations.
Thank you, Angie, and I'm very glad that we are starting our fourth year of this kind of conversation, and definitely in this kind of dark time that we need this inspiration and light, and definitely our first session is definitely will bring it, hopefully. And I'm super excited to present our two speakers, our first speakers of the series. Two of them are leading scholars, activists that I admire and been inspired by for years, and not only me, a big group of people, and we're going to learn a lot about their work today. But there is much more to learn if people want to read more. So our first speakers will be Dr. Sigal Nagar-Ron and advocate Netta Amar-Shiff, both of them from the Mizrahi Civic Collective. They will speak about the historical sources of the collective and the potential Mizrahi women's experience to create different political horizon for Israeli society. They will discuss the concept of the Southeast in the context of the current social and political reality in Israel, Palestine. So first, Sigal Nagar-Ron is a sociologist and a senior lecturer at Sapir College. She has been a committed social activist for many, many years, contributed to some of the leading organizations such as the Mizrahi Democratic Rainbow, Keshet Demokratית Mizrahit, Achoti, a sister, a Mizrahi feminist organization, and the Mizrahi Civic Collective. She also led the feminist forum at the Sapir College. Her academic work stem from her perspective as a Mizrahi activist. Her research focuses on the intersection between ethnicity, class, space, and gender in Israel. In 2023, she was awarded the Best Article Award for a groundbreaking article titled Things Seems seen here and from here and are seen from there. Observation from the margins on the Israeli labor market. The article was published in 2022 in the journal Israeli Sociology. The article was also awarded the Shenhav Sha'abani Prize from the Van Leer Institute in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv University. Nagar-Ron's work has impacted the Israeli Cultural Bureau of Statistics critical decision to measure and publish data on the third generation ethnic inequality. And this is a very important development for researchers and to understand the situation and historical and current. She also co-edited with Tami Razi and Moti Gigi the first Hebrew book on first generation students in Israeli academia titled Diversifying the Ivory Tower, First Generation Students Writing. It was published by Pardes Publishing House in 2022, and here is my copy that I love and adore this book. Our second speaker is Netta Amar-Shiff. She's a Yemenite Jewish Israeli human feminist lawyer who has been working on Palestinian rights since 1998. Her expertise is international human rights and humanitarian law with a focus of spatial planning rights, demolitions, and forcible displacement of Palestinians in the West Bank, as well as constitutional and administrative law. Amar-Shiff has been the co-founder of the head of the Mizrahi Civic Collective since February 2023, and we will hear more about this wonderful organization later on this meeting. She was also one of the co-founders of the Democratic Mizrahi Rainbow and Achoti Sister, a Mizrahi feminist organization. She worked with the Israeli Civil Rights Organization, and she was a board member of B'Tselem and Voice of Women. And in 2019, she filed and litigated the Mizrahi petition against the nation state law. She also is writing now her doctoral dissertation at the Department of Environmental, Geoinformatics, and Urban Planning Sciences at the Ben-Gurion University in Beersheba. Her research focuses on the legal geography of forcible displacement of Bedouins in the Negev and the West Bank. So before we start, we kindly remind you that the seminar will be structured as usual. It's between 45 to 50, maybe 55 minutes in this case of presentation and half an hour of Q&A. Ro'i Shukron, that is here with us, will be moderating the chat. So you are all welcome to write your question there. If somebody wishes to open their microphone and ask their question, you are more than welcome to do it. Just make sure that you let us know on the chat and wait for your turn. So we're going to start with that. We're going to start with Angie having a conversation with the Sigal, and then later on me with the Netta. So Angie.
Thank you, Yuval. Sigal, you have been working with Mizrahi women for your entire career, starting from the women in your family, in your neighborhood, in the region where you live, listening to their stories, but also to the silences and untold experiences has been key to your work, which, by the way, has influenced me so much. Your work was one of the first works that I read as a graduate student, and I remember emailing you and being super excited when you got back to me. So all of this has been listening to the stories of these women, but also, as I said, to their silences and untold experiences has been key to your work. So what did you take from the experience of Mizrahi women?
Well, thank you, Angie. Thank you, Yuval, first of all, for the generous introduction. I'm really grateful for the both of you for the invitation to participate and take part in this series. But before we start, with your permission, I would like to dedicate this talk to the memory of my colleagues and friends from Sapir Academic College who were murdered on October 7 by Hamas, to Sydney Flesh, who was murdered with her husband in their home in Kfar Aza, to Ronit Sultan, who was murdered with her husband in Kibbutz Cholit, to Yasmin Zohar, who was murdered with her husband and two daughters, Keshet and Tchelet, in their home in Nahal Oz. I also want to pray to the speed return of our sister and brothers who are held hostage for 164 days by the Hamas, and prayer for the end of the war in Gaza.
Amen.
Well, so I would like to begin our talk by expressing my gratitude and appreciation to you, Yuval and Angie, for creating this series. You're creating a unique platform for discussing epistemic framework to think and talk about Sephardi Jew, Arab Jew, Mizrahim, and Mizrahiness. This platform is unique and rare. Many of us who delve into this issue of Mizrahim and Mizrahiness often feel uncomfortable within the available academic framework, and we're seeking and trying to find or create our own framework to conceptual our experience, our multiple reality, trying to understand our histories, and to imagine and visualize an alternative future. So back to your question, Angie. You ask me what about the experience of Mizrahi women. Well, I have a lot to say about the experience of Mizrahi women. I'll start by saying the obvious but most important fact that to be Mizrahi woman in Israel is highly uncomfortable. Mizrahi women are seen as the ultimate other of Israel society. If the Tzabar, the Ashkenazi men, represent the ideal new Jew, the bold and the brave European pioneer in the Middle East, then the Mizrahi woman is portrayed as its negative, primitive, uneducated, passive, unproductive, etc. Mizrahi women get constant reminders of being the other, the non-European Jew. In 1993, Alex Giladi coined the term Masouda from Sderot. Giladi was at the time the head of the first commercial television, used the phrase to depict the target audience representing the lowest common denominator, referring to the Mizrahi women who live in a remote development town. Masouda from Sderot has come to symbolize the Oriental old women, characterized as backward, ignorant, and vulgar. For the younger generation, a different term exists, the frecha. She is also described as uneducated and vulgar, and as a kind of a cheap sexuality, somewhat akin the American term bimbo. I mentioned Alex Giladi and the television because the images and stereotype about Mizrahi women are spread through the media. Just last night, I saw a new commercial for cleaning product, and the presenter was a young Mizrahi woman. This is not new. Mizrahi women are usually associated with the domestic, presenting a cleaning product or home cooked meal. They never represent more prestigious or intellectual institute like banks or academies. This pattern of representation not only reinforces a narrow stereotype, but also limits the public perception of Mizrahi women capability and contribution. I will give only one example of how such narrow image affect Mizrahi women positionality in Israel society. Just 2 months ago, 41 years after Giladi coined the term Masouda from Sderot, on January 8, during the war in the south of Israel and Gaza, while the entire population of Sderot was being evacuated from their home, the Ministry of Defense, Yoav Gallant, stated, No woman from Sderot or Ofakim will tell us how to handle the war. He meant that they don't count. Gallant's statement disregard the Israeli population most affected by the current war and those who have suffered for nearly daily artillery for 20 years, ignoring their insight on their living condition and their vision of the future of the region. Mizrahi women have a lot of insight about Israeli society from their special position in the margin, but usually their voices remain unheard, like the case of Orna Peretz from Kiryat Shmona. Peretz criticized Prime Minister Netanyahu for closing the emergency room in the town. And his response was, "You are not interesting, you are boring." That was in October 2018. Today, we are all aware of the necessity of an hospital and ER in the largest city close to the north border. As a Mizrahi woman, I bear with me the experience of being marginalized. And as a scholar researching Mizrahi women, I feel privileged to encourage the silence to speak following Ella Shochat's suggestion, aiming to bring to public Mizrahi women voices, their unique experience and knowledge. I firmly believe that academic work is relevant and has the power to influence public discourse and lead for social change.
Thank you, Sigal. And my second question would be, has to do with your uh, self-definition as a Mizrahi feminist scholar. This definition of yourself is also the starting point of your work. What are the contributions of Mizrahi feminism to the correction or improvement of Israeli society?
Okay. Well, being a Mizrahi feminist means being aware of the unique positionality Mizrahi women have within Israeli society. This involves recognition the double oppression Mizrahi women face due to their ethnic origin and their gender. It's mean acknowledging that they are part of a collective that underwent an ethnization process in Israel, being conscious of the stereotype about Mizrahi women, as I mentioned earlier, and to be aware of the important role ethnicity play in inequality mechanism till this day. That's on the one hand. And on the other, to be Mizrahi feminist is to recognize the privilege Mizrahi women have as Jewish women in the Jewish state, privilege they have over Palestinian men and women. Mizrahi women are situated in between the Ashkenazim and the Palestinian citizen of Israel. This unique positionality above the Palestinians and below the European Jews, the Ashkenazim, is a starting point to observation of the complexity of Israel society. In fact, women who define themselves as Mizrahi feminists not only recognize the injustice they, their family, and their community suffer from, rather they acknowledge that they are part of a system which oppressed the Palestinians. And from this starting point, they are acting to change society. As Mizrahi scholars like Ella Shochat, Vicky Shirans, Madar Lavi, and Henriette Dan Kalev already pointed out, the Palestinian issue cannot be separated from the Mizrahi issue. We cannot dismiss ourselves from the responsibility of oppressing of others. Mizrahi feminism is distinct from liberal feminism, which aim to improve the so-called women condition by increasing women salary, expanding women representation in boards of directors, in the army, and so on. Liberal feminists want a larger piece of the existing cake, while Mizrahi feminists aspire to bake entirely different cake. In the 21st century, we cannot think of women as unified homogenic category. One should ask herself, are the interests of a woman who immigrated from Ethiopia and live in peripheral town the same as those of third generation Ashkenazi women from Tel Aviv? Are the interests of a Bedouin woman living in unrecognized village in the Negev the same as mine, even though I also live in the Negev? Given their history and unique position in Israel, Mizrahi feminists know that we cannot speak or think about women as unified category. Instead, we must recognize our differences and work toward creating a more just society, taking into account the most vulnerable population. This was the goal of the Mizrahi women at the Mizrahi Democratic Rainbow in the 90s. Netta and I were young women when we met there. These are the goals of Achoti, literally my sister. Achoti is a Mizrahi feminist movement that Netta and I helped to found in 2000. Among other things, Achoti operates a fair trade shop that support Arab women from the Galilee, Ethiopian women, Bedouin women from the Negev, women who have survived sexual abuse, and more. Last year, along with old friend, we established the Mizrahi Civic Collective. I am sure Netta will elaborate on this later. However, I want to emphasize one point. Our resistance to the so-called law reform, which is actually a constitutional revelation, did not stem from the belief that the Israeli justice system is flawless and doesn't need a reform. It sure does. But the one launched by Yariv Levin and Simcha Rothman is not the one we envision. We strive for more democracy, not less. So back to your question, what does it mean to be a Mizrahi feminist? It's mean to be aware of the many systems of oppression and act for more justice society.
Thank you. My third question has also to do with the scholarly perspective. What does it mean as a scholar to be a Mizrahi feminist? Meaning, what are the theoretical frameworks that you engage with?
Okay. Thank you for that question, Angie. To be a Mizrahi scholar means to embrace the unique positionality Mizrahi women have in Israel society and use it as a point of departure for research. When I start my way in the Israeli academy in the early 90s, I felt that I have no language to articulate my intuitive feelings of discomfort within Israeli society. At the time, the dominant sociological paradigm was still the the modernization theory, a theory which legitimized the low status of Mizrahim in Israel. Edward Said's book, Orientalism, was enlightening, a really eye-opening for me. And when I read Ella Shochat's book about the way the Israeli cinema not only reflected the Orientalist discourse, but contributed to the construction of images about Ashkenazim, Mizrahim, and Palestinians, I decided to explore how Mizrahi women create self-worth in light of the negative stereotype imposed on them. So in my first works, I focus on identity formation. Then I realized that I cannot fully understand the experience and everyday life complexity without taking into account the class issue. So I turned to study the labor market, focusing on the southern local labor market and exposing its different effect on different social group living in the region. Kibbutzim member, the new ultra Orthodox community, Garinim Toraniyim, in the Negev, and the old resident third generation Mizrahi living in development town. This part of my work was inspired by Jean and John Komaroff book, Theory from the South, and the Portuguese sociologist Bonaventura de Sousa Santos books, The End of the Cognitive Empire and Epistemologics of the South. The Komaroff imposes that since the Enlightenment till the present, the West has seen itself as the source of knowledge and wisdom. The global North create theory and develop the concept, while the global South provide them with the raw materials. They suggested to see the South as a source of knowledge that in the current moment held a critical insight for the entire world. Bonaventura de Sousa Santos add to this perspective by pointing out that the Euro-American theories supplies no good answer to the harsh reality that characterized the living condition of people in the global South. Thus, he suggests departing from the Eurocentric tradition and developing theories based on the experience of marginalized people that struggle against colonialism, capitalism, and the patriarchy. Theory from the South usually erased from Marxist perspective, materialist perspective, which examine the economic dependence of the third world on the first world. While theory dealing with the construction of the East by the West are seen as theories dealing with cultural and identity formation. Nancy Fraser has formulated this as a distinction between cultural injustice versus socioeconomic injustice. Cultural injustice is rooted in social pattern of representation, stereotype about the community, while socioeconomic injustice is rooted in the political economy structure of society, exploitation in the labor market or deny access to the labor market. This is very elegant analytical distinction, but in the real world, cultural and political economy are intertwined, and one cannot be separated from the other. Marginalization process constantly involve symbolic deprivation and economic deprivation. Thus, a struggle for justice is always combination of question of recognition and question of distribution. For example, the marginalization of Mizrahi women in the Israeli labor market is related to the diminishing stereotype of them as stupid, lazy, passive, and so on, spread by the media. So in order to fully understand how oppression system work, we should take into account simultaneously the economic aspect of inequality and the cultural and symbolic one. The Southeast perspective does that. It's combined the cultural injustice line, which emphasized by the East-West thought, and the economic injustice line, which is emphasized in epistemologic from the South. Embracing the Southeast perspective allow us to capture a more nuanced and more complex picture of reality. I think that in the case of Mizrahim and Ashkenazim in Israel, the issue of class cannot be separated from the issue of stereotype and construction of identity. Therefore, I adopted the Southeast perspective and apply it in my academic work.
I have so many questions. um, the last question before moving on would be specifically about this. So the when you speak about the Southeast perspective, in order to understand the experience of marginalization and exclusion of the Middle East region, you've already spoken about it, but could you provide maybe another example from your work that illustrates this Southeast perspective? And maybe you could expand a little bit more on the perspective's contribution to the paradigm of the global South.
Well, thank you, Angie, for that question. Well, I think that my work regarding the Central Bureau of Statistics illustrate the intertwining of cultural and academic injustice, aligning with the Southeast perspective. I believe that linking inequality issue with identity issue can raise awareness among Mizrahim regarding their unique history and unique positionality in Israel, especially because many of them do not view themselves as marginalized and oppressed. This is the big paradox about Mizrahim and Mizrahiness in Israel. As I try to illustrate at the beginning of the talk, ethnicity is deeply embedded in every aspect of social life and play a crucial role in shaping Israeli society. But despite its significance, ethnicity is constantly denied in public discourse. Discussing Mizrahiness is a political issue remain a taboo. Since the 19th, there are a group of critical intellectuals who writes about ethnicization and racism in Israel. Yet the intellectual discourse has struggled to enter into the Israeli mainstream discourse. The majority of Israeli, both Mizrahim and Ashkenazim, deny the significance of ethnicity today. Most people in Israel are unified under the Zionist meta-narrative. The Israeli melting pot ideology overshadow the ethnic inequality. The high rates of Mizrahim politicians, their loudness and the high visibility of Mizrahim in the media give the impression that inequality between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim is an old story. However, despite the social mobility achieved by many Mizrahim, inequality in Israel continue to widen. This is why it is important to continue to measure ethnic inequality. The recognition of the Mizrahim as a social minority by the Central Bureau of Statistics is therefore highly important. When I say minority, I don't mean minority by numbers, but rather the denial of access to power and resources. For this reason, acknowledgement of Mizrahim as a social category by the Central Bureau of Statistics can lead us not only to inequality data, but also to a perceptual change. My interest in the Central Bureau of Statistics started during my research on Mizrahi women in the peripheral labor market. I found no update data in official records regarding their participation in the labor market or regarding their salaries. It came as a surprise to me, especially because I could find data regarding Arab women and Jewish women in general, but not about Mizrahim or Ashkenazi women. I know that there used to be a data regarding ethnicity, and I wonder why this data has vanished. This led me to explore how the Central Bureau of Statistics has contributed to the creation and then to the erasure of the ethnic categories of Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. The Central Bureau of Statistics, the Bureau statistical definition are Asia, Africa versus Europe, America. As critical scholars have already pointed out, these binary categories and the hierarchy between them is an Israeli creation, stemming from an Orientalist perspective, which was manifested through unequal distribution of resource. I'm referring to the policy and strategy regarding the management of population, especially during the first decade of the establishment of the state. This policy pushed the Mizrahim to the economic, cultural, and geographic margin of Israel society. Until the 90s, the Central Bureau of Statistics measured inequality between immigrants from Asia, Africa, and immigrants from Europe, America, and published the data in the statistical yearbook. But from the 90s, this measurement gradually vanished. And today we cannot find valid data regarding the inequality between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. The reason for this the reason this data no longer exists is the expiration date that the Bureau set for ethnicity 2 generations after immigration. Consequently, today, more than half of the Jewish population have become untraceable by official statistics. Third and fourth generation are defined as Israeli. Well, instead of continuing to measure inequality according to ethnic lines, the Central Bureau of Statistics developed new indicator for measuring inequality, the socioeconomic cluster and the peripherality index. Both are geographical indicator. In the article I wrote discussing this issue, I argue that the Bureau's statistical blindness approach hinder the ability to understand the current role of ethnicity in the mechanism of stratification. The ethnic blind approach do not characterize only the Central Bureau of Statistics. It's also reflected in the policy of other Israeli institutions. In fact, national statistics influence all other state agencies. The lack of recognition of the Mizrahim as a minority group prevent the ability to correct inequality in many aspects of social life. The economic inequality, the representation of Mizrahim in institutions such as higher education, the way they are treated in the legal system, and much more. After the article was published, it's evoked many interests far beyond academic circles. I was interviewed in the Israeli media about the subject, and this led to my cooperation with the Knesset member Emily Muati and with the Civil Rights Association, who filed a formal petition calling for transparency of inequality data in the third generation. More than a year later, in a response to the petition in August information regarding inequality between Mizrahim and Ashkenazim. Well, I cannot stress enough how dramatic this announcement is. Once this data will be available, they're not available yet. It could lead to the to a perception a perceptual change. Based on valid data on ethnic inequality, we can move beyond subjective feelings and media images and recognize the current effect of the ethnicization process that Mizrahim in Israel have undergone. Acknowledging Mizrahim as distinctive minority group provide the possibility for recognizing their unique position as oppressed subject in Israeli society, as well as coming to realize their unique history. This will enable to acknowledge that they, like the Palestinians, are oppressed by the state. This recognition can lead to a Mizrahi-Arab collaboration and will open the possibility of envisioning an alternative future, a future of more inclusive and just society. Well, I believe this is the moment to turn to Netta. She has a clear vision of how this collaboration should look in the real world.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Sigal, for this. And yeah, I mean, we could talk about this so much. I think we should, turn to Netta and then open the space for questions. Thank you so much, Sigal.
Yeah, thank you, Angie and Sigal. I think that many of the issues that came now will continue in the conversation that me and Netta are going to have now. So I want to chat to Netta, and she will speak about the liberatory potential of the feminist Southeast perspective. In Amar-Shiff's words, this liberation is connected to the call for the mutual rescue of the Palestinian and Israeli people. And we're going to speak about this kind of a concept as well in a minute. But first of all, welcome, Netta. I heard your name in 1997, 1998, only coming to university as our leader, as there was a social group, social justice group in the Hebrew University, and since then I'm following your lead in many other organizations and activities, and I admire your work, and I'm so happy and privileged to have this kind of conversation. So my first question is going to be more on the personal journey. So you have been a Mizrahi feminist in the political and social arena for more than 30 years. And you defined in the conversation that this kind of your journey as a moving across in between moments. So could you please elaborate on your personal and professional journey in the past 30 years? And if you want to also talk about what is this in between moments.
Okay, thank you. I think the admiration is mutual, Yuval. So thank you, and thanks to Angie for the invitation, for the opportunity to present some of my insights in these very difficult times, I have to say. So I'll go through what I call a journey, I mean a historical and personal journey between the moments. And in particular, 3 moments in the past 30 years since Oslo Accords in the mid-1990s. So these 3 moments I name the identity moment, the constitutional moment, and the existential moment that we are in today since the 7th of October. These moments highlight the liberatory potential, as you said, mentioned, of Mizrahi struggle for enhancing equality, social justice, and democracy in Israel, for Israeli Jews, but also for Israeli Palestinians, citizens of Israel, also Palestinians, in relation to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I will also speak about this. So before I elaborate on these 3 moments, I want to clarify that maybe the source of the moment's perspective, because in the public discourse, We've heard when the judicial reform was launched in January 2023 by Levin and Rothman, as mentioned by Sigal, then the liberal legal discourse talked about whether it is indeed a constitutional moment for Israel. Is Israel indeed changing its basic fundamental values and constitutional framework altogether? Is it really going towards a dictatorship? Is it really dismantling the separation of powers and the rule of law? And is it a threat to the basic values in this coup d'etat? And so contemplating about this constitutional moment from a Mizrahi perspective, and I mentioned and I elaborate a little bit afterwards, this was not really January 2023, even though it was the moment where the Mizrahi Civic Collective really gathered itself to start and organize. It was not the constitutional moment that we see. We saw the constitutional moment in the enactment of basic law Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, where it explicitly excluded Palestinian citizens of Israel from being recognized as national minority, but also on the way encouraged the negation of Arabness and Jewishness and Jewish identity from its Arab roots, and by undermining the status of the Arabic language from a formal language to a special status language which has no parallel in the world, and also in the fact that social engineering has continued without with complete disregard to our experience as Mizrahim being thrown in the Israeli periphery in the 1960s and 50s. But
Netta?
yeah.
Netta, we
Okay,
can't
you were
hear you.
frozen
Oh, now
for a few
came
seconds.
back. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you go back to your sentence?
Yeah. So I mean, today our daily life in Israel ran in the shadow of the horrible and as Dr. Moshe Behar notes, a historically extraordinary attack of the 7th of October with no parallel in the world. There's no deny that it is indeed an existential moment. So using this language, looking at the traumatic era in the past year since the constitutional moment and what we've been going through, thinking of this moment as and connecting to the fear that we all felt on the 7th of October and afterward, and as an existential moment. We were caught as Israelis in between these moments, and which threatened to further undermine already flawed Israeli democratic nature on the one hand, but also going even beyond that since the 7th of October, even threatening the physical presence of Israelis who started to speak in terms of survival. But as I also, later also note, this is also the existential moment is also relevant to Palestinians. It also reminded them of the Nakba, of the attacks in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, in the discourse about, genocide, about what is really actually going on in Gaza, what is indeed going on in Gaza, and how many people not only got killed until today, but how many are expected to be killed in terms of the high numbers, which are precedental in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, so from this perspective, we see Israelis and Palestinian life, in this shared land. It found in themselves in a historical moment with a potential for re-articulating the identity is something that we should look, especially in light of the Oslo Agreement. So my activism had really started as a young Mizrahi feminist, but also in the rise of Mizrahi feminism in the 1990s, as Sigal noted. And I remember that we talked about, Mizrahi identity. We talked about it in the Hebrew University. What does it mean? But we always, it always carried a universal a set of values that did not only talk about advancing Mizrahim from an ethnic perspective, but looking at the entire structure of Israeli society and stratification, the ethnic stratification as Sigal elaborated on, and so the question is really the identity moment that we have faced in the 1990s was it really coincidental that it took place exactly when a similar identity moment took place for Palestinians, with the hope of liberation. And we were talking back then of both the external occupation and the internal occupation, right? So it seemed that the identity moment of the 1990s maybe was a signal of the shared path that Mizrahim and Palestinians maybe should go, should advance. But it is definitely something that didn't happen on purpose. I mean, it was not, the Mizrahi, the rise of Mizrahi voice in the 1990s was a consequence of the door opened for intra-Israeli discussion and internal, let's say, internal critique within the Jewish society, because the Palestinian issue should have been resolved, right? It was right before we hoped that both Israelis will be liberated, in a sense that they would no longer be occupiers, but legitimate sovereigns in their area, in the sovereign maybe boundaries and territory, and when they were liberated, then Mizrahi had a chance to be liberated. It is very interesting to connect the dots to the liberation in terms of the nation state law that was indeed focused on undermining any possibility for Palestinian recognition of Palestinian national identity, but it has also opened the door for us as Mizrahim to join into this constitutional moment and say we also have a statement in relation to the nature of the state of Israel, and not only in relation to advancing our rights or social mobility, when we had values, democratic values that we would like to advance. Okay, going back just to the issue of and maybe you should stop me when needed.
Yes.
But I did want maybe one last point here. The peace paradigm was not something that Mizrahim has brought, because it was led by the same Shimon Peres that advanced the new Middle East. And maybe the same way that identity moment didn't work for Palestinians, because it called for a new Middle East vision that didn't really, was not really aimed at liberating them, because at the time there was high advancement of new outposts and new settlement in parallel to the advancement of in parallel to the Oslo Accord in the period right afterwards, to which Palestinians objected, and the same way that Oslo agreements did not liberate them, they also didn't carry any really hopeful Mizrahim who have seen the new Middle East being carried, being implemented at their expense, when factories really moved to the occupied territories, and when that peace was not participatory in nature. It was not a peace between peoples. It was peace between corporations, and between a big money that was supposed to maybe land comfortably in the hands of some of parts of the state of the parallel society. But it was definitely Peres that has been part of the Mapai regime that discriminated against Mizrahim, the same Peres that was at least considered to be part of the denial of the kidnapping of the Yemenite and Mizrahi babies in the 1940s, 1950s. That same Peres was not the one to carry the banner of sustainable peace. What was interesting in terms of the Mizrahi call for identity is that the call for the right of Mizrahim to call for the identity is that it actually carried with it the perspective that was criticized, perspective of undermining the cohesion of Jewish identity. So when the peace camp has shifted from talking about peace because it didn't really work to talking about coexistence, then the Mizrahim, talked about coexistence with whom? First, you must coexist within the Jewish society equally, and then you can coexist with Palestinians. It was always a way that the identity moment of Mizrahim was regarded for many years as an obstruction, to real peace, because Israelis, the Israeli Ashkenazi peace camp could not move forward because Mizrahim has always pulled them backward. To talk about the inequality and the ethnic stratification within the Jewish society. So I think the liberatory advantage here is in terms of, forcing the Jewish society to look inside for real peace and real coexistence.
Yeah, and I'm really intrigued by how do you work with historical moments and of course moving between moments. And I think in many of your work and the organization that you were involved in, the Mizrahi organization, they always try to to emphasize that the moment that we are experiencing now, if it's at 2019, if it's 2023, 2023 and others, it's always have historical context into it that we need to bring. And I want to delve now to two moments that you already mentioned. One is the nation state law in 2019, and you're really I think a very important role litigating the Mizrahi petition against this law, because this law, one of the characteristics it said was to downgrade the Arabic languages as official language, but to bring the historical connection between, first of all, Arabic is a Jewish language. Second, Arabic is the language of the Mizrahi Jews, and that's why you have a stake. And you remember the Supreme Court, you had the trouble to explain this link, because in this 100 of years of this conflict, people forgot this kind of linkages that had to place. So I think that this moment brought it back. And another moment that I think it's the same in that sense is the judicial reform in 2023 and the construction of the foundation of this Mizrahi civic collective that are very connected between the two. Again, trying to show that the reform is needed, but because of other historical context. So if you can say something about that.
Yes, So you were one of the experts that had actually submitted their opinions in the Israeli Mizrahi petition against the nation state law, and it was very important for us that our petition is indeed aimed at both dismantling the myth of Israeli democracy and Israeli Jewishness as being a binary, a binary, having a binary content. Either you're Jewish or you're Arab, either you're democratic or you're non-democratic, while we know that that Israel democracy is indeed, has always been flawed. So when we objected in that constitutional moment was not, I mean, we always knew that Palestinians do not have similar rights, as Jews in this country. But that constitutional moment was putting it on in one of the Israelis' basic laws. So it was actually the legislation of a basic law is part of the enactment of the Israeli constitution, to be. That's part of the formation of the Israeli constitution. So it was important for us to put a finger on that moment and say, indeed you go for Palestinians, but you undermine us on the way, and also the way you used Mizrahim, or the absence of our presence in the legislation process was manipulative. In what sense? In the legislative process, the committee, in the Knesset committee that has heard different voices from the Israeli society, both Palestinians and Jewish voices, did not, even though such critical Mizrahi voices were heard, it was really coincidental that the day of the Arabic language in the Knesset was really at the same period where they actually finalized the legislative process. And you had the MK Yossi Yona, from Iraqi descent, speaking in the Knesset in Arabic about how Arabic is a Jewish language at the same, I think even the same day where that Knesset constitution Knesset committee has heard a public, part of public kind of participation in the legislation process, but it did not make the connection. It did not invite experts, Mizrahi experts that were critical to the definition of what is being Jewish, what is the Jewish culture, what does it include, in the name of what Judaism, is really founding the Jewish identity of the state of Israel, to justify the undermining of the Arabic language, and in that sense undermining, of course, the holders and the people who speak this language. So I think that it was interesting to see that we had to substantiate our petition, because in the legislative process, these experts' opinions and this history is not something that was discussed. It is not something that was that facts were brought, that experts were heard, and it was interesting to see that some members of Knesset were even, laughing about, so what is Moroccan Arabic Jewish language? Is it Arabic? Is it not Arabic? It was definitely a lot of ignorance in the legislative process. So, but maybe just to move forward and talk about that constitutional moment where we have realized that we had the right, the extreme right wing in Israel, planning, which I think it was us, the Mizrahi Civic Collective, that pointed to the rivalry between the old regime and the new regime in Israel. So the old regime was the one that said, well, we cannot have, the democratic foundations of the state of Israel being destroyed by racist propaganda that wants to just to clear Netanyahu, immediate political gain to change the whole regime in Israel and undermine the judiciary. So the old regime was actually saying, let's just keep it as it is. Do not make these changes. And what we have pointed out, that it has a name. It is the old regime. That old regime prioritizes, the rule of the judiciary because it has no, major criticism against the judiciary. While we, as a Mizrahim, because the Israeli Supreme Court was not active in social and economic rights, and was also, of course, not active in protecting Palestinian rights. So in terms of minority rights and in terms of social and economic rights, it was very passive. So this activism, which the right wing wanted to balance, against the Jewishness of the state, was not, not existent, but it was definitely selective. And selective, as it was not something that we would like to, maintain. We called for a new reform. So we found ourselves not in between, but because we were not really, we could definitely not join the racist coup d'etat, but we could also not agree to just standing in demonstrations and calling for the protection of the judiciary and talking about Israel democracy and how we should, maintain it, while we know that there's some flaws in it. As I said, it was the peak of the constitutional moment rather than the beginning of that constitutional moment. What we called is for a reform, and I think it was the Mizrahi perspective was really a Southeast perspective in that sense, because we both talk about minorities and ethnic origin and the excluded social groups in Israel, but we also talked about social and economic rights that were ignored by the judiciary and of course by the government, but it was definitely something we could not protect. So I think we had a liberatory vision here when we said no to the old constitutional revolution, but also no to the old reform. And the reform that we have proposed, maybe just briefly to note, and this is something we presented to the Israeli president, but also in the Knesset. First of all, we talked about fair representation. So we could not give up, the identity moment that we had in the 1990s. Neither Palestinians cannot give up their identity moment. So we had to struggle for a fair representation. But we also couldn't, stay with identity politics, because it was definitely not something that we called for in a narrow sense. By the way, a whole Mizrahi perspective developed since the identity, moment in the 1990s until today. One that really limit its criticism to Mizrahim and would not go to, to other disadvantaged groups such as, refugees, alien workers, and other violations of, human rights that takes place in Israel. But it also talks about transparency in the judicial selection process, because we do know that there's always a seat for Mizrahi, judge. But as we said, no more, maybe two, but no more. I mean, it was very limited, as Aaron Barak said. I couldn't find a Moroccan a Moroccan judge to preside in the Israeli Supreme Court good enough to go to the Israeli Supreme Court. We also talked about the training of judges. They have a training scheme, the Center for Judicial Education and Training never talks, whenever trains judges in issues such as distributive justice, restorative and recognition justice, the over-policing, the criminalization of marginalized populations, law and poverty, human rights, international humanitarian law, collective rights is also, of course, something that is not discussed in the Israeli context because there's only one collective right, and that's for the Jewish people and no other. We also talked about public participation in the legislative process, something we have learned from the Mizrahi petition, and also an enactment, finally, of a basic law, human rights, and a basic law named social rights. So, yeah, okay, yeah.
It's really, I can speak with you, as you know, for hours, but sadly, we times are progressing, and we have many questions on the chat. So I had another question that I would postpone it to the discussion, but it was on the concept of mutual rescue after October 7. But I suggest that we'll open this kind of our discussion to the questions that we already have and others that wants to ask questions. So Ro'i, please.
Okay. Just adding the spotlight. Yes. So our first question is from Naomi Rabia, who asked, how would you address Israelis, including Sephardi and Mizrahi Israelis, who say we are all Israelis and not to focus on the divide between Sephardim and Ashkenazim anymore? And Naomi says that she can speak about how it is relevant to her in the US, but doesn't know who to address about it because she does not live in Israel.
Sigal or Netta, who wants
I just
to?
want to remind us all that we have 15 minutes left.
Yeah, so maybe Ro'i, I suggested
if you can collect a few
several
questions,
and then we'll open for comments from Netta and Sigal to them.
So I will say there's a few maybe comments to respond to and one more question. And I also invite everybody in the chat to start asking more questions if you have them. Raul Salinas says that he's a Sephardic man and understands what Sigal was talking about. So there's a comment there with appreciation. Robert Olesh is asking if anyone knows the marriage rate between Ashkenazim and Sephardim or Mizrahim in Israel. I don't know if we can answer that here, but if somebody knows it, maybe they can message. Well, we have perfect. And we have from Tariq, what is the difference between inheritance amongst Jews and Muslims? Tariq says, I think that inheritance amongst Jews is that a female does not inherit from the father. Is this true? I think maybe he's speaking according to Halacha. And Evelyn Din Olmsted is asking Netta if you could provide dates or other details about the Knesset speech about Arabic as a Jewish language. She would really appreciate that.
Okay, yeah, Sigal, you want to start? Or?
Yes. Regarding the data about the mixed marriages, so-called, I have the data from Professor Inon Cohen, who is a sociologist at Columbia University, is specialized in this. In this kind of stuff. Well, he made his research based on the Ministry of Interior records, and he found out, and that would be a surprise, I'm sure, for many of you, that at the age of 25 till 43, that means in the younger generation, only 15%, 15, yeah, 15% are of mixed heritage, mixed marriage. My student always ask this question, and I ask them back, what are your estimation? And they're also say 16%, 16%, 18%, 80%, and no, it's 15%. That means that 85% are not mixed. That I found that incredible.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was
Yes, it is.
shocked when.
Netta, do you want to?
Yeah, about the links and the information, we have the Mizrahi petition, where I elaborated on the discussion on the Knesset. I think we have it online, so it's MizrahiNationLaw.com, so you can find it there. But I wanted to relate to the issue of Jewish unity, and maybe just to I mean, the accusation that Mizrahim are obstructing Jewish unity is, of course, again, a myth and completely false. What we need to understand is our very existence is, preconditioned on the fact that we are equal, that we live in an equal society, that we, although we have different experiences and we have past, violations of rights and we have past injustices, our goal is to amend those, and our goal is to change and reach, full equality, both from social perspective and from an ethnic perspective. So this was, of course, one of the main accusation we've heard when we filed the Mizrahi nation, the Mizrahi petition against the nation state law. But the whole point is to say that Jewishness is not only, European Jewish history. It is also Arab Jewish history and other histories, Jewish histories. But what our very existence is mutual, but is not unified, and we will not accept, the erasure we have faced in the past. What we see today is Mizrahim that have, completely detached themselves from Ashkenazim on the one hand, and there you can find hatred, and you can find a complete negation, of Ashkenazim as something superior, as something negative. And on the other hand, we have Mizrahim that, negate Mizrahiness, that, want to erase their own history. So we are here saying we do not have to erase ourselves. We do not want to erase anybody else. What we want is to reconstruct the idea of Jews living in Israel in a manner that would allow both for ethnic restorative justice or corrective justice, but also for Palestinians as well.
I think we have time for one question from Yuval and another question from me, and we would wrap it up here. Yuval, do you want to? Because you said you had a.
Yeah, so I have the mutual,
ties
but I
into
have
what
other
Netta just said.
questions. Yeah, but you can start. Yeah, so Netta, if you want to talk about the mutual rescue, the kind of mutual rescue, definitely after October 7th, but you already elaborate that, I would love it. I think that is very important. But I see, I think, very interesting connection between the two conversations. One is the erasure of Mizrahi from statistical Sigal. That's fascinating. I think issue that Sigal is dealing with it and changing it. And with you, Netta, and your work, that also both of you are in both of the fields, also in how Mizrahi is being erased in legal political discussions of nation-state law and reform, democratic reform. So in both of that cases, it's really interesting to talk about erasure and how we bring this kind of a voice with, but a voice that in both of the cases is not a voice that stands by itself, but is a voice that represents other minorities and other groups that are not being erased. So that's my questions for both of you. Do you want to, Netta, do you want to start? And you want to ask your question also, Angie, first? Or?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, and I want to hear what you guys think. Very briefly, I also see another commonality between the first part and the second part, or the things that Sigal shared, the things that Netta shared, has to do with the reconstructive nature of Sephardic, of Mizrahi feminism, meaning the combination of the Mizrahi awareness and the feminist struggle, the combination of these, in a way, it can be an alternative or a response to the violence of any revolutionary approach, such as Marxism. I think there is, in my opinion, there is an inherent element of violence in Marxism, that whether we call it revolutionary violence, I don't care what kind of violence, but there is a violent element that feminist, the combination of Mizrahi and feminist approach shows on the one hand, and can offer an alternative to. And I was thinking about the insistence on concepts like you said in it, mutual rescue, concepts of reconstructing, giving voice, thinking about a shared future. All this language that keeps appearing in your talks, both Sigal and Netta, I think show this this really paradigm, this different paradigm in terms of the alternative to violence.
Who wants to start?
I don't know if you guys want to, like, we have 3 minutes. I don't know if you guys, if Netta and Sigal want to respond to what Yuval said or to what I said.
Netta, you want to start?
Maybe Sigal,
Okay.
Sigal can.
Yes, Sigal.
No, Netta and I spoke yesterday night, and Netta conceptualized it very well. The idea of the mutual salvation, and I think that Netta, you have it very elegant, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I really spoke too much about other things, about the mutual. I think what Angie, you're just saying about resistance, of course, resistance to violence, both fascism and the other paradigm that exhausted, force. But the shift to mutual rescue, I think, carries with it the potential of understanding, as I said, that our existence is conditioned, mutual, it's mutually conditioned. So and I think it's a feminist perspective, because just as in feminism, we do not fight men, we do not want to eliminate men, we would like to eliminate patriarchy, okay? We need men need us. So if we say we, rescue men by and manhood by abolishing patriarchy, the same as men abolishing patriarchy, then of course saving women, the same I think we can talk about Ashkenazim and Mizrahim, and the same paradigm is applicable to Palestinians and Israelis. I think once we, as Israelis, would set our mind that instead of mutual destruction, we move, because that's the paradigm today. Yeah, mutual destruction, that will save us. We call for mutual rescue. Okay, and it really goes down to my very work as human rights, lawyer working with Palestinians. The first thing that came to my mind was, in the 7th of October, was the phone calls that I got from Palestinians that I represented, and I saved their lands and their homes against demolition, is that they called to ask, how are you doing? And the fact that I work and try to save, spare, Palestinians from harm being conducted by security forces, by the military, or by the occupation, basically, is exactly the advantage that I have in the discourse with Palestinians that other Israelis maybe do not have. If we engage as civilians, and our civilian voice, that's another advantage. Our civilian voice is not, we do not have the guns, okay, as civilians. We have our values, and we have what we can do. And what we can do is call for the rescue of Palestinian civilians. And so when we call for their rescue, they will come for their rescue. Of course, it's a mutual commitment. It's a mutual commitment, because I definitely, and that's a higher level, maybe a lower level in terms of the human values. Some activists told me I would save Palestinians even if they don't save me, and I say, well, you're in a higher level, moral level than me. I would no, because I think if we go to the lowest of the low, is if there's a mutual commitment to a mutual rescue, but it's upon us, because as occupying powers, as the military, empire in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think it's upon us to start with it. And I think if we adopt it, and then it's something that would spiral between the two people. But we can speak about it another time. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Sigal. Thank you, Netta. Thank you, everyone. We like to respect everyone's time, and so we're gonna have to leave it here. But I remind you all that we're meeting again on April 2nd with Susan Sered and Hefzi Cohen Montague, with a great talk called "Caring Experts: Sephardi Mizrahi Women in Entwined Worlds." Thank you to the both of you. Thank you, Yuval. Thank you, Roy. And thank you, everyone who's joined us.
And we put in the chat a link to the Mizrahi Collective website that you will have many, you can get more information, updates, follow the really important activity that's being done around these kind of topics that we just discussed.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Angie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you. Have a good day.